The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the neighborhood park. Children's laughter filled the air as families enjoyed the warm summer evening. Among them, 10-year-old Marcus kicked a soccer ball around with his friends, relishing the last bit of daylight before heading home for dinner. As he chased after an errant kick, something caught Marcus's eye at the edge of the nearby woods. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, was struggling against a man who had a firm grip on her arm. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat as he watched the stranger roughly pull the girl towards the tree line. Time seemed to slow down. Marcus glanced around, searching for any adults who might have noticed what was happening. But everyone else was caught up in their own activities, oblivious to the scene unfolding just yards away. The little girl's muffled cries barely carried over the ambient noise of the park. Marcus knew he had to act fast. His mom always told him to find a grown-up if he ever saw something wrong, but there wasn't time. The man was already disappearing into the shadows between the trees, dragging the terrified child with him. Without a second thought, Marcus dropped his soccer ball and sprinted towards the woods. His friends called after him, confused by his sudden departure, but their voices faded as he focused on keeping sight of the girl's bright yellow dress through the foliage. As he entered the woods, the sounds of the park gave way to the rustling of leaves and snapping of twigs beneath his feet. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear and determination driving him forward. He had no plan beyond following and trying to help, but he knew he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. The forest grew denser, making it harder to see where the man was taking the girl. Marcus strained his ears, trying to catch any sound that might guide him. A muffled sob to his left had him changing course, weaving between the trees as quietly as he could manage. Suddenly, he stumbled into a small clearing. The man stood with his back to Marcus, still gripping the girl's arm. She locked eyes with Marcus, a spark of hope lighting up her tear-stained face. The man started to turn, alerted by the sound of Marcus's arrival. In that split second, Marcus had to make a choice. Should he confront the man directly, try to distract him so the girl could run, or turn back and get help, risking losing them in the woods? The weight of the decision pressed down on him, knowing that whatever he did next could change lives forever. Marcus took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He may have been just a kid, but in that moment, he felt the responsibility of a hero resting on his shoulders. With determination in his eyes, he prepared to take action that would alter the course of not just his life, but the lives of everyone involved in this harrowing situation. The man's eyes widened in surprise as he fully turned to face Marcus. For a heartbeat, the clearing was silent save for the girl's quiet whimpers. Then, everything erupted into chaos. Marcus shouted at the top of his lungs, hoping his voice would carry back to the park. "H-E-L-P, somebody H-E-L-P-U-S. The man lunged forward, releasing the girl's arm as he tried to grab Marcus instead. But Marcus was quicker, dodging to the side and yelling again. "Roman," he cried to the girl, who seemed frozen in shock. His words snapped her out of her daze, and she bolted towards the direction of the park. Enraged, the man changed course, attempting to chase after the fleeing child. But Marcus, running on pure adrenaline and instinct, threw himself at the man's legs. They both tumbled to the forest floor in a tangle of limbs and leaves. Marcus knew he was no match for the adult in strength, but he was determined to buy the little girl as much time as possible to escape. The man struggled to his feet, kicking out at Marcus, who rolled away just in time. Leaves and dirt clung to his clothes and hair as he scrambled backwards, trying to keep the man's attention focused on him instead of the escaping girl. "H-E-L-P. Marcus screamed again, praying that someone, anyone, would hear and come running. As if in answer to his prayers, distant shouts began to echo through the woods. The man's head snapped up, a look of panic replacing his anger. With one last furious glare at Marcus, he turned and ran deeper into the forest, crashing through the underbrush as he fled. Marcus slumped back against a tree trunk, his legs suddenly feeling like jelly as the adrenaline began to wear off. He could hear the voices getting closer, calls of "hello," and "is anyone there?" mixing with the sound of multiple people making their way through the woods. Relief washed over him as he realized help had finally arrived. But even as the first rescuers burst into the clearing, Marcus couldn't help but wonder about the little girl. Had she made it safely back to the park? And what about the man? Will he be caught, or was he still out there somewhere? As park rangers and concerned parents surrounded him, peppering him with questions and checking him for injuries, Marcus found his thoughts drifting to bigger questions. What made someone do something so terrible to an innocent child? And what gave a young boy like himself the courage to intervene? Marcus knew that his actions that day would have consequences far beyond this one incident. He had glimpsed a darker side of the world, one that he couldn't simply forget. But he had also discovered a strength within himself that he never knew existed. As he was led out of the woods, surrounded by a protective circle of adults, Marcus caught sight of a flash of yellow. The little girl stood with a police officer, her parents clutching her tightly as tears of relief streamed down their faces. When she saw Marcus, a small smile broke through her tears, and she gave him a tiny wave. That simple gesture hit Marcus like a tidal wave. The full weight of what he had done, and what could have happened if he hadn't acted, came crashing down on him. He felt his own eyes well up with tears, a complex mix of emotions swirling inside him. As they emerged from the tree line back into the park, now swarming with emergency vehicles and concerned onlookers, Marcus knew that his life would never be the same. He had faced true evil and found the courage to stand against it, but he had also witnessed the power of one person to make a difference, no matter how young or small they might be. The story of what happened in those woods would be told and retold in the days and weeks to come. But for Marcus, the most important chapter was yet to be written. How would this experience shape him? What lessons would he carry forward? And how might his actions that day inspire others to find their own inner hero when faced with injustice? As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting the park in twilight, Marcus realized that this was not the end of the story, but merely the beginning of a new and profound journey, for himself, for the little girl he had saved, and for all those who would hear their tale. The following days were a whirlwind for Marcus. Police officers came to his house, gently questioning him about what he had seen and done in the woods. His parents hovered nearby, a mix of pride and concern etched on their faces as they listened to their son recount his brave actions. News vans lined the street, reporters eager to interview the young hero who had saved a little girl from a potential kidnapping. Marcus's mom fielded their calls, fiercely protective of her son's privacy during this tumultuous time. She knew the importance of what Marcus had done, but she also saw how the weight of it all was affecting him. At night, Marcus would wake up in a cold sweat, the memory of the man's angry face looming over him in his dreams. His dad would sit with him, a comforting presence in the darkness, reminding Marcus that he was safe and that he had done the right thing. School became a strange experience. Some kids treated Marcus like a celebrity, peppering him with questions and begging to hear the story again and again. Others seemed almost scared of him, as if his brush with danger had somehow marked him as different. Marcus found himself gravitating towards his closest friends, the ones who treated him normally and didn't make a big deal out of what had happened. A week after the incident, Marcus's parents sat him down for a serious talk. The police had made an arrest based on Marcus's description and other evidence they had gathered. They wanted Marcus to look at some photos to see if he could identify the man from the woods. Marcus felt his stomach churn at the thought of seeing that face again, even in a picture. But he knew it was important. He had to make sure they caught the right person to keep other kids safe. With shaking hands, he pointed to one of the photos, his voice barely above a whisper as he said, "That's him." The next big hurdle came when Marcus learned he would need to testify in court. The idea of standing up in front of a room full of people and talking about what happened terrified him. What if he said the wrong thing? What if he couldn't remember all the details correctly? His parents arranged for him to meet with a kind lady called a victim advocate. She explained the court process to Marcus in terms he could understand and helped him practice what he would say. She'd assured him that being nervous was normal and that the most important thing was to tell the truth as best he could remember it. As the court date approached, Marcus found himself thinking more and more about the little girl he had saved. He knew her name now, Lily, but he hadn't seen her since that day in the park. His mom explained that Lily and her family needed time to heal, just like Marcus did, but he couldn't help wondering how she was doing, if she was having bad dreams too. Then one afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Marcus peeked around his mom as she opened it, and there stood Lily with her parents. The adults exchanged quiet words as Lily shyly looked up at Marcus. There was a moment of awkward silence before Lily suddenly rushed forward, throwing her arms around Marcus in a tight hug. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice muffled against his shirt. Marcus felt a lump form in his throat as he hugged her back, realizing for the first time the true impact of what he had done. This wasn't just about being brave or doing the right thing. He had saved someone's life, someone's child, someone's future. Lily's parents invited Marcus and his family over for dinner that weekend. As the adults chatted in the kitchen, Marcus and Lily sat in the backyard, gently swinging on an old tire swing. They didn't talk much about what had happened, but there was a silent understanding between them, a bond forged in those terrifying moments in the woods. As the court date drew nearer, Marcus found his anxiety growing. He started having trouble sleeping again, and his grades began to slip as he struggled to concentrate in class. His parents worried, wondering if testifying would be too much for him. But Marcus, despite his fears, knew he had to see this through. He couldn't let the man who had tried to hurt Lily get away with it. The morning of the trial arrived, and Marcus put on the new suit his parents had bought for the occasion. It felt stiff and uncomfortable, so different from his usual t-shirts and jeans. As they drove to the courthouse, Marcus stared out the window, his mind racing with all the things that could go wrong. But as they walked up the courthouse steps, Marcus spotted a familiar face in the crowd. It was Mr. Johnson, his soccer coach, standing there with a supportive smile. Then he saw his best friend Alex and his family, and his favorite teacher Mrs. Garcia. More and more familiar faces appeared, neighbors, classmates, even the owner of the corner store where Marcus bought candy on the weekends. All these people had come to support him, to show him he wasn't alone. Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest, chasing away some of the fear that had been gnawing at him. He stood a little straighter, lifted his chin a bit higher. He could do this. He had to do this. Inside the courtroom, Marcus's resolve was tested as he caught sight of the defendant. The man looked smaller somehow, less menacing in his prison jumpsuit, but seeing him still made Marcus's heart race. As he was called to the witness stand, Marcus took a deep breath, remembering all the practice he had done with the victim advocate. He spoke clearly, recounting what he had seen and done that day in the park. His voice only wavered a few times, and each time he paused, he would look out at the supportive faces in the gallery. His mom's encouraging nod, his dad's proud smile, Lily's brave little wave, all of it gave him the strength to continue. When the defense attorney stood up to cross-examine him, Marcus felt a flicker of panic. What if he asked something Marcus couldn't answer? What if he tried to twist Marcus's words? But as the questions came, Marcus found that sticking to the truth was easier than he had feared. He didn't have to remember any stories or lies. He just had to say what had really happened. As he stepped down from the witness stand, Marcus felt a mix of relief and exhaustion wash over him. It was over. He had done his part. Now it was up to the judge and jury to decide what happened next. The rest of the trial passed in a blur. Marcus sat with his parents, listening as other witnesses testified and lawyers made their arguments. He didn't understand everything that was said, but he could feel the tension in the room, the importance of what was happening. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the jury returned with their verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the foreman stood, holding a small piece of paper that would determine the fate of the man who had tried to take Lily. Marcus held his breath, his hand gripping his mom's tightly as they waited to hear the decision that would bring this chapter of their lives to a close, one way or another. The courtroom held its breath as the jury foreman stood. We, the jury, find the defendant. Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, his heart pounding. Guilty on all charges. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Marcus felt his mom's arms wrap around him, heard his dad's shaky exhale. It was over. They had won. Or so they thought. In the days that followed, Marcus expected to feel lighter, like a weight had been lifted. Instead, he found himself struggling with a mix of emotions he couldn't quite understand. Yes, the bad man was going to jail, but why didn't that make everything okay again? His parents noticed the change in him. Marcus, once outgoing and always ready with a joke, had become quieter, more withdrawn. They suggested he talk to a counselor, someone who could help him process everything he'd been through. At first, Marcus resisted. He was a hero, wasn't he? Heroes didn't need help. But as the nightmares persisted and his grades continued to slip, he reluctantly agreed. Dr. Sarah, the child psychologist, had a kind face and an office full of toys and games. She didn't push Marcus to talk about the incident right away. Instead, they played board games and drew pictures. Slowly, Marcus began to open up about his feelings, the fear that still lingered, the guilt over not being able to just get over it. The confusion about why he had acted so bravely that day, but now felt so scared all the time. Meanwhile, life in their small town was changing. Parents who had once let their kids roam freely now kept a closer eye on them. The park where it all happened stood empty more often than not, the laughter of playing children replaced by an eerie silence. Marcus overheard adults whispering about other attempted abductions in nearby towns. Was there more to this than just one bad man? Lily's family decided to move away, the memories associated with their home too painful to bear. The day before they left, Lily came to say goodbye to Marcus. As they sat on his front porch, Lily confided that she was scared to go to a new school where nobody knew what had happened to her. "What if it happens again?" she asked, her voice small. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, but took a deep breath like Dr. Sarah had taught him. "It might," he said honestly, "but now you know how to yell for help. And there are good people everywhere, not just here." He wasn't sure if he fully believed his own words, but seeing Lily's shoulders relax a little made him feel like maybe, just maybe, they could both be okay. As summer turned to fall, Marcus faced a new challenge, returning to school. His classmates had heard bits and pieces of what happened, and rumors had filled in the gaps. Some kids treated him like a celebrity, others like he was made of glass. Marcus just wanted things to go back to normal, but he wasn't even sure what normal was anymore. His best friend Alex stuck by him, not pushing to talk about what happened, but always ready with a silly joke or a new video game to try. It was during one of their gaming sessions that Alex casually mentioned something that made Marcus's blood run cold. "You know, my cousin in Oakville said there was a guy hanging around their school playground last week. Kinda sounds like..." Marcus didn't give the rest. His mind raced with possibilities. Could it be connected? But the man who tried to take Lally was in jail. Unless he wasn't working alone. The thought hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. What if he had only stopped part of the problem? That night, unable to sleep, Marcus crept downstairs and booted up the family computer. He began researching, looking for any similar incidents in the area. As he dug deeper, a pattern started to emerge. Small towns, all within a couple hours' drive. Children approached by strangers, some more aggressively than others. Most had been thwarted by alert parents or bystanders, but a few kids had gone missing, only to be found later, shaken but alive. Marcus felt a familiar mix of fear and determination rising within him. He knew he should tell his parents or the police about what he'd found, but a part of him worried they wouldn't take him seriously. He was just a kid after all, but he was also the kid who had saved Lily. Maybe he could do more. He started a notebook, jotting down dates, locations, descriptions. He created a map, marking each incident with a red pin. As the pins multiplied, Marcus felt sure he was onto something bigger than anyone realized. But what could he do about it? The answer came unexpectedly. At school, their class was assigned a project on community heroes. Most kids chose firefighters or police officers, but Marcus decided to interview Mrs. Grayson, a retired detective who lived down the street. As they talked about her career, Marcus found himself sharing some of what he discovered. Mrs. Grayson listened intently, her eyes narrowing as Marcus laid out the pattern he'd uncovered. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Marcus," she said finally, "I think you might be onto something here. But this isn't something you should be investigating on your own. It could be dangerous." A mix of validation and frustration washed over Marcus. Someone believed him, but he didn't want to stop now, not when he felt so close to uncovering the truth. Mrs. Grayson must have seen the conflict on his face because she leaned in, her voice low and serious. "How about this? You keep doing your research, but you share everything with me. I still have contacts in law enforcement. We can work on this together, but safely. Deal?" Marcus nodded, a spark of excitement cutting through the fear that had become his constant companion. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of purpose, of hope. He wasn't just a victim or a witness anymore. He was part of the solution. As he walked home that afternoon, Marcus felt eyes on him. He glanced over his shoulder, heart racing, but saw only empty sidewalks and parked cars. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, waiting. Was it just paranoia, a product of everything he'd been through? Or had his amateur sleuthing caught the attention of people who didn't want their secrets uncovered? Marcus quickened his pace, the weight of his backpack suddenly feeling like nothing compared to the weight of what he now knew. He was on the trail of something big, something dangerous. But with Mrs. Grayson's help, maybe they could stop it. Maybe they could make sure what happened to Lily, what almost happened to Lily, would never happen to another child again. As he reached his front door, Marcus took one last look around the quiet street. Whatever was coming, whatever truths were yet to be uncovered, he knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The collaboration between Marcus and Mrs. Grayson quickly gained momentum. They met regularly, poring over Marcus's research and the additional information Mrs. Grayson gathered through her old police contacts. As the weeks passed, a disturbing picture began to emerge. A network of child predators operating across several states, more organized and far-reaching than anyone had suspected. Marcus threw himself into the investigation, driven by a mix of determination and the lingering fear that had plagued him since that day in the woods. His parents, while proud of his initiative, grew concerned about his obsession. They worried he was reopening old wounds instead of healing. But Marcus couldn't let it go. Every new piece of information felt like a step closer to making sure no other kid would have to go through what he and Lily had experienced. At school, Marcus struggled to keep his double life secret. His grades improved as he applied his newfound investigative skills to his studies, but he became more distant from his friends. Alex, ever loyal, stuck by him even when Marcus was too distracted or tired to hang out. "Whatever you're dealing with," Alex said one day, "I'm here if you need me." Marcus wanted to confide in his friend but feared putting him in danger. As autumn faded into winter, Marcus and Mrs. Grayson made a breakthrough. They identified a pattern in the predators' movements, predicting they would likely target a nearby town during the upcoming holiday festival. Mrs. Grayson immediately reported their findings to her police contacts, but the response was frustratingly slow. Budget cuts and jurisdictional issues meant that law enforcement couldn't mount the kind of operation needed to catch the criminals red-handed. Frustrated by the lack of action, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He overheard his parents discussing a day trip to the very town he and Mrs. Grayson had identified as the likely target. Despite Mrs. Grayson's warnings about the dangers of getting directly involved, Marcus saw an opportunity he couldn't pass up. The day of the festival arrived, cold and overcast. As Marcus's family wandered through the crowded streets, he kept his eyes peeled for anything suspicious. His heart raced every time he saw an adult talking to a child, his mind jumping to the worst conclusions. Hours passed without incident, and Marcus began to wonder if their prediction had been wrong. Just as his family was preparing to leave, Marcus spotted something that made his blood run cold. A man fitting the description of one of the suspects from their investigation was talking to a young girl near the edge of the festival grounds. The girl's body language screamed discomfort, but no one else seemed to notice. Marcus froze, the memories of that day in the woods flooding back. He knew he should find a police officer or call for help, but fear paralyzed him. What if he was wrong? What if he was too late? The man was already leading the girl away from the crowd, towards a row of parked cars. In that moment, Marcus made a choice. He couldn't let another child go through what Lily almost did. He told his parents he needed to use the restroom and slipped away, following the man and the girl at a distance. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone, ready to call for help. But as he rounded a corner, he found himself face to face with the suspect. The man's eyes widened in recognition, and Marcus realized with a jolt that this wasn't just any predator. It was someone connected to Lily's case, someone who knew exactly who Marcus was. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stand still. Then the man lunged forward, grabbing for Marcus's phone. Marcus dodged, his body reacting on instinct. He shouted for help, his voice carrying over the distant sounds of the festival. The young girl, momentarily forgotten, seized the opportunity to run. But Marcus found himself trapped between parked cars, the man advancing with a mixture of anger and desperation in his eyes. "You don't know when to mind your own business, do you, kid?" The man growled, reaching into his pocket. Marcus's eyes darted around, looking for an escape route, a weapon, anything that could help him. His mind raced, trying to remember the self-defense moves his parents had insisted he learn after the incident with Lily. Just as the man was about to grab him, a familiar voice rang out. "Marcus." It was Alex, breathless and wide-eyed, having followed his friend out of concern. The momentary distraction was all Marcus needed. He ducked under the man's arm and ran towards Alex, shouting for him to call the police. But the danger wasn't over. The man, realizing his plans were unraveling, made a desperate move. He lunged for the boys, managing to grab Marcus's jacket. As Marcus struggled to break free, he locked eyes with Alex, silently pleading for his friend to run and get help. In that moment, surrounded by the fading sounds of a cheerful festival, with his best friend watching in horror and a dangerous criminal clutching at him, Marcus faced a terrible choice. Should he fight back and risk escalating the violence? Try to reason with the man, or hope that help would arrive in time? The weight of the decision pressed down on him, heavier than anything he'd faced before. Marcus took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever came next. He might be just a kid, but he had already proven once that he could be a hero. As adrenaline coursed through his veins, Marcus prepared to act, knowing that what he did in the next few seconds could change lives forever, including his own. Time seemed to slow as Marcus locked eyes with his attacker. In that moment of tension, a flash of movement caught his attention. To his shock, he saw Mrs. Grayson sprinting towards them, her face a mask of determination. But instead of relief, Marcus felt a surge of confusion and betrayal as Mrs. Grayson grabbed Alex, pulling him away from the scene. "Run, Marcus!" Mrs. Grayson shouted, her voice laced with an urgency that didn't match her actions. The man holding Marcus loosened his grip slightly, surprise evident on his face. In that split second of hesitation, Marcus twisted free, stumbling backwards. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Why was Mrs. Grayson here? Why wasn't she helping him? The answers hit him like a punch to the gut as he saw Mrs. Grayson and his attacker exchange a look of recognition. "You said he wouldn't be here," the man hissed at Mrs. Grayson, who still had a firm grip on a struggling Alex. "Plans change," she replied coldly. "We need to move. Now." The realization crashed over Marcus like a wave of ice water. Mrs. Grayson, the retired detective he had trusted, the one who had helped him piece together the network of predators, was part of it all along. She hadn't been helping him solve the case, she had been monitoring his progress, making sure he didn't get too close to the truth. Alex's eyes were wide with fear and confusion as he looked between Marcus and Mrs. Grayson. "Marcus, what's going on?" he called out, his voice shaking. Marcus's heart pounded in his ears. He had inadvertently led his best friend into danger, all because he thought he could be a hero again. The weight of his mistake pressed down on him, threatening to crush his resolve. But as he watched Mrs. Grayson start to drag Alex towards a nearby van, something snapped inside Marcus. He couldn't let this happen. Not to Alex. Not to anyone else. With a surge of adrenaline, Marcus charged forward, catching both adults off guard. He barreled into Mrs. Grayson, causing her to lose her grip on Alex. "Run!" Marcus shouted to his friend. "Get help!" Alex hesitated for just a moment before taking off towards the festival grounds, his sneakers pounding against the pavement. The man lunged for Marcus, but the boy was quicker, ducking under his grasp and darting between parked cars. As Marcus ran, his mind raced even faster. How deep did this conspiracy go? Who could he trust? The police? The FBI? He had thought he was close to cracking the case, but now he realized he had only scratched the surface of something far more sinister. He could hear footsteps behind him. Both Mrs. Grayson and the man were in pursuit. Marcus weaved through the parking lot, trying to make his way back to the crowded festival. If he could just reach the crowd, surely someone would help him. But as he rounded a large SUV, he found his path blocked by another man he didn't recognize. This newcomer wore a police uniform, but the predatory look in his eyes told Marcus this was no rescuer. Trapped between his pursuers and this new threat, Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. He had walked right into the heart of the conspiracy, and now he was surrounded by people who wanted to silence him. In the distance, he could hear Alex's voice, shrill with fear, calling out for help. Had his friend found someone trustworthy, or was he unknowingly leading more conspirators to their location? Marcus's eyes darted around, searching for any means of escape or weapon he could use to defend himself. His gaze landed on a discarded bottle near his feet. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. As Mrs. Grayson, the original attacker, and the fake police officer closed in, Marcus gripped the bottle tightly. He was just a kid facing off against a group of dangerous adults, but he had already proven once that bravery could overcome seemingly impossible odds. With his heart pounding and sweat beading on his forehead, Marcus prepared to make his stand. He didn't know if he could win this fight, but he knew he had to try. not just for himself, but for Alex, for Lily, and for all the other kids who might fall victim to this twisted network if he failed. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the air, adding to the chaos of the moment. Were they real police, coming to help, or more conspirators rushing to cover up their crimes? Marcus couldn't be sure of anything anymore. As his attackers tensed, ready to make their move, Marcus took a deep breath. Whatever happened next would determine not just his fate, but potentially the fate of countless other children. With determination burning in his eyes, he raised the bottle, ready to fight with everything he had. In that moment, surrounded by danger and uncertainty, Marcus stood as the last line of defense against an evil far greater than he had ever imagined. The true battle was about to begin, and the outcome would change everything. The tension reached its breaking point as Marcus stood his ground, bottle raised in defiance. Just as his attackers were about to pounce, a cacophony of shouts erupted from all directions. FBI, freeze! Suddenly, the parking lot was swarming with agents in tactical gear, weapons drawn. Marcus's attackers froze, their faces a mix of shock and rage. Mrs. Grayson made a desperate lunge for Marcus, but he dodged, swinging the bottle and catching her arm. She stumbled, giving the FBI agents time to subdue her. In the chaos, Marcus spotted a familiar face, Agent Rodriguez, the kind FBI agent who had interviewed him after Lily's rescue. "You're safe now, Marcus," Agent Rodriguez said, placing a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "We've been tracking this network for months. Your investigation helped us connect the final dots." As the conspirators were handcuffed and led away, Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was short-lived as he remembered. "Alex, where's Alex?" Agent Rodriguez's expression turned grim. "We're still searching for him. He was last seen." A commotion near the festival entrance cut him off. Marcus's heart leaped as he saw Alex break free from a group of onlookers running towards him. The two friends collided in a fierce hug, both babbling explanations and apologies. "I found a real cop," Alex gasped. "I didn't know who to trust, but I remembered what you said about trusting your gut." As the adrenaline faded, the full weight of what had happened began to sink in. Marcus looked around at the sea of FBI agents, police officers, and stunned festival-goers. His simple act of bravery in the park months ago had set off a chain of events that led to the takedown of an entire criminal network. In the days that followed, the true scope of the conspiracy came to light. Mrs. Grayson had been a key player, using her status as a retired detective to manipulate investigations and protect the network. The fake police officer was just one of many corrupt officials involved. Marcus and his family were placed under protective custody as the case unfolded. He was hailed as a hero once again, but this time the weight of that title felt different. He had faced true evil, not just once but twice, and had emerged stronger for it. As he sat with Lily and her family, who had flown in to thank him once more, Marcus felt a sense of closure. Lily's eyes shone with gratitude and newfound strength. "You saved me twice," she said softly. "Once in the woods, and again by stopping these bad people." The reunion was bittersweet, filled with tears and laughter as they shared their experiences of healing and growth. Marcus realized that his journey had not just been about solving a crime, but about learning the true meaning of courage and resilience. Weeks later, as life began to return to a new normal, Marcus stood before a crowd at a ceremony honoring the young heroes who had helped bring down the criminal network. As he accepted an award for his bravery, he locked eyes with Alex in the audience. His friend gave him a thumbs up, a silent acknowledgement of their shared ordeal and unbreakable bond. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. "I'm not a hero," he began, his voice steady. "I was just a kid who saw something wrong and couldn't look away. We all have that power inside us to stand up for what's right, even when it's scary." As he spoke, Marcus noticed movement at the back of the hall. A group of children, all survivors rescued during the takedown of the network, filed in quietly. Their presence was a powerful reminder of why the fight against child predators was so crucial. "But there's something else I learned," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. "We're stronger together. It wasn't just me, it was Alex, Lily, the FBI, and every person who refuses to let evil win. That's the real power that brought down this network." As Marcus finished his speech to thunderous applause, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. The nightmare was over, but its lessons would stay with him forever. He had discovered a strength inside himself he never knew existed, and he was determined to use it to make the world a safer place for all children. But even as Marcus basked in the glow of victory, a nagging thought tugged at the back of his mind. Mrs. Grayson's final words to him as she was led away echoed in his ears. "You think this is over? You've only scratched the surface, boy." As Marcus stepped down from the podium, he caught Agent Rodriguez's eye. The agent's subtle nod told Marcus that their work was far from over. There were more children to save, more networks to uncover. And Marcus knew, with a mix of determination and trepidation, that he would be there to help, every step of the way. The crowd's cheers faded as Marcus walked off stage, his mind already turning to the challenges that lay ahead. He had faced his fears and emerged victorious, but the real battle, the fight to protect innocence and bring justice to those who would harm children, was just beginning. And Marcus was ready for whatever came next. As Marcus stepped off the stage, the applause still ringing in his ears, Agent Rodriguez approached him with a serious expression. "Marcus, we need to talk," he said quietly, leading the boy to a private room away from the crowd. Inside, Marcus found his parents waiting, along with a team of FBI agents huddled around a computer. The atmosphere was tense, a stark contrast to the celebratory mood outside. Agent Rodriguez took a deep breath before speaking. "Marcus, remember how Mrs. Grayson said we'd only scratched the surface? Well, she wasn't lying." The lead FBI technician turned the computer screen towards Marcus. On it was a complex web of connections, names, and locations, far more extensive than anything Marcus and Mrs. Grayson had uncovered. "Your work helped us crack their encryption," the technician explained. "We've identified hundreds more suspects across the country, maybe even internationally." Marcus felt a mix of pride and dread wash over him. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. As he studied the screen, a familiar name caught his eye. His blood ran cold as he pointed to it, his hand shaking slightly. That's my school principal." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The network had infiltrated deeper into their community than anyone had realized. Marcus's mind raced, thinking of all the kids at his school who might be in danger. Agent Rodriguez placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "We're going to need your help again, but this time, it's going to be even more dangerous. We can't force you to do this. It's your choice." Marcus looked at his parents, seeing the fear and pride battling in their eyes. He thought of Lily, of Alex, of all the children who had been rescued, and those who were still at risk. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. "I'm in. What do we do next?" The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Marcus worked closely with the FBI, using his unique perspective as a kid to identify suspicious behaviors and potential targets. He underwent intensive training in surveillance and self-defense, preparing for the possibility of confronting more predators. As the investigation progressed, Marcus struggled with the weight of his secret. He couldn't tell his friends or classmates about the danger lurking in their school. Every day, he walked the halls, watching his principal with a mix of fear and determination, knowing that one wrong move could jeopardize the entire operation. Finally, after months of careful planning, the FBI was ready to move. In a coordinated operation spanning multiple states, they prepared to take down the remaining members of the network. Marcus's role was crucial. He would wear a hidden camera to gather final evidence against his principal. On the day of the operation, Marcus entered the school feeling like his heart might burst out of his chest. He made his way to the principal's office, using the pretext of discussing a school project. As he sat across from the man he once trusted, Marcus fought to keep his voice steady, asking carefully rehearsed questions designed to elicit incriminating responses. Just as the principal began to say something damning, a commotion erupted in the hallway. The door burst open, and to Marcus's shock, Mrs. Grayson stood there, somehow free and holding the gun. "It's over," she snarled, her eyes wild. "You've ruined everything." Time seemed to slow down. Marcus saw Mrs. Grayson's finger tighten on the trigger. He heard shouts from down the hall, the FBI moving in. In that split second, Marcus made a decision. He lunged forward, tackling his principal to the ground just as a shot rang out. Chaos erupted. FBI agents swarmed the room, subduing Mrs. Grayson. Marcus felt a sharp pain in his arm where the bullet had grazed him, but adrenaline kept him moving. He scrambled to his feet, watching as both his principal and Mrs. Grayson were handcuffed and led away. As the dust settled, Marcus found himself once again hailed as a hero. The evidence he gathered had been the final piece needed to bring down the entire network. Hundreds of children were rescued, and countless more were now safe from harm. In the aftermath, as Marcus sat in a hospital bed getting his arm bandaged, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had faced unimaginable dangers, uncovered dark secrets, and found strength he never knew he possessed. But most importantly, he had made a difference. Agent Rodriguez visited him, bringing news of the operation's success. "You've done more than most adults could ever dream of, Marcus," he said. "But remember, the fight to protect children never really ends. There will always be those who want to harm the innocent." Marcus nodded, a mix of emotions swirling inside him. He was relieved it was over, proud of what he'd accomplished, but also aware that he could never go back to being just a regular kid. He had seen too much, done too much. As he prepared to leave the hospital, surrounded by his grateful parents and loyal friends, Marcus made a silent vow. He would continue to be a voice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. He would use his experience to educate others and help prevent future crimes against children. The road ahead would be challenging, but Marcus knew he was ready. He had faced his fears, outsmarted dangerous criminals, and helped bring justice to those who needed it most. As he stepped out into the sunlight, arm in a sling but spirit unbroken, Marcus realized that his greatest adventure, the lifelong mission to protect the innocent, was just beginning.